pointing that out.
Like, you're fine.
Yeah, I'm excited. I like, it's a good way to de-stress, you know, it's like. Yeah, don't worry.
Just to defy the odds.
Tech support? What do you think about this?
It is a little trashy, but that's kind of why I like it.
I feel that.
You know what I mean?
Because it's like, I mean, one of the only times I went there, it's like, it was like 30
Yeah.
They were chill, but like, they were harassing other people.
No,
so.
yes. Like, you could just tell there's people there, like, trying to hunt.
Yeah, no, there was like 25-year-old guys like looking for college students. I'm like,
Yes.
this is kind of weird. A lot of other girls.
Yeah, no, it's a little scary sometimes. But I went with like a partner recently, like, I mean, I was in a big group, but it was like, it was pretty big. And it was guys and girls. So I feel like that probably would have been something. If it was like all girls, it would have been a little scary. And I mean, like you said, it's a little trashy, but I don't really mind. Like, you know how I said that, like, back at home I have like, downtown, it's kind of like that. So I don't really mind. It's the norm for me. I don't have really good music too.
Music is pretty good.
Okay, y'all, this is the last scooch, I promise. So, if there is a seat next to you and it's empty, if you're on the sides, if you could scoot toward the walls, and if you're in the center, if you could scoot toward the middle, this is the last time I will ask you to scoot over, I promise. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
I will say though, I think it did happen when we did get kicked out. Because, well, two of my friends have vapes. So they got in and they didn't like have a like gas tank on their hand. Yeah, so they were like, oh, let's have drinks. And they brought like 2 extra drinks and we were literally just passing them around. And then it was actually Sam. She went to the restroom and broke off her ex. And then she took off her wristband. And they called her and they were like, she had a drink in her hand. And I mean, with no wristband, like it was like you like stuck in. So they were like, get out. And there was this other kid who also had an ex. I had like a drink on his hand. He was just drinking it with a fucking big ex here, like minor. And they were like, get out. And then
Good evening, everyone. We're about to get started. So before we do, if you haven't already done so, please scan the QR code on the bottom of the screen. That's going to allow you to ask our speaker questions during the lecture. So scan the code. You don't have to type anything yet. You can do it when a question comes to you. But this slide with the QR code is going away. So please scan the QR code and we will begin.
That's why it's called UO.
Why is this in GS requirement? The metal powder?
The region GS, I didn't realize that's what it is.
Yeah, they do. But like, what's the point of my questions?
How to like force kids, like, cause like realistically, have you ever gone to the video to like force them to do something you like to start out?
True.
It's like a college class essentially.
Good evening.
Yeah. If it's like a professional.
Good evening. All right, that's more like it. All right.
That's crazy.
It's only Tuesday, folks. We're not tired yet, are we? What a beautiful day today. So, my name is Dr. Rich Reddick. I'm the Senior Vice Provost for Curriculum and Enrollment and the Dean of the Undergraduate College at the University of Texas at Austin. Welcome. I'm also a long-standing professor in the College of Education and the African Diaspora Studies Department. It is my pleasure to welcome you to our final lecture of the Spring 2024 Helen and Jeff Herbert Family University Lecture Series, brought to you by a generous gift from Helen and Jeff Herbert. To the Herbert family, thank you for making this lecture series possible. Tonight, we are here to investigate the knowledge and expertise related to leadership and ethics that our faculty bring to the 40 acres. Thus far, this spring's lecture series has posed questions about mentorship and philosophical self-reflection that have the potential to help shape how one navigates leadership opportunities. Our lecturer tonight, Dr. Kathleen McElroy, offers yet another valuable perspective on how leadership practices in the newsroom determine what becomes news in the first place. And if you think about how or what we read or watch influences what we believe to be true about our local and global communities, it becomes increasingly apparent how important it is to consider who is in the newsroom and who stays in the news industry. Thus, I'm honored to introduce Dr. McElroy. Kathleen McElroy is a professor in the Frank A. Bennack Jr. Chair in Journalism and co-director of the Center for Ethical Leadership in Media at the University of Texas at Austin. She received her PhD from UT Austin School of Journalism and Media after almost 30 years as a professional journalist. While earning her doctorate, she was a Harrington Graduate Fellow and received awards for teaching and research. Before coming to UT, Dr. McElroy held various management positions at the New York Times, including Associate Managing Director, Dining Editor, Deputy Sports Editor, and Deputy Editor of the website. She previously worked for The National, an all-sports daily, and Newsday on Long Island, as well as the Austin American Statesman, which I always worked for, so yay Statesman, the Huntsville Item, and the Bryan College Station Eagle in Texas. Her interests include newsroom practices and ethics, racial discourse, and sports media. And finally, before we begin, I want to remind you that during the talk, you should be sending us questions for Professor McElroy by using the QR code, which you saw previously. And after the lecture, we will be asking a few of your questions to Dr. McElroy, so please remain seated once the lecture is concluded. And also, before I get started, I want to say one thing, and when I bring out Dr. McElroy. Being selected to give the Herbert Family Lecture Series is an honor for our faculty, and due to that, we are presenting her with a medal right here, and she'll have it. She might wear it today, I don't know.
I'll take it.
There it is. Congratulations.
Thank you.
And something you should know, so she can wear this in class if she wants to, or wear it downtown, or go to HB, that's all good. But when we have commencement or we have activities where we wear a regalia, Dr. McElroy will be wearing this. So when you graduate in 2027,
Ooh, I may still be here, okay.
hang on to this group so
I'll hang on.
they can see you, and you'll see Dr. McElroy, you're like, I was at that lecture when she got that medal. So anyway, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kathleen McElroy.
Thank you all so much. He says it's Tuesday. I'm trying to think, what would I be watching on HGTV on Tuesdays? There's no NCAA basketball tonight. I don't think so. So, well, the lecture is on who makes news. So, I know you all consuming news of some sort. Yell out to me some of the news sites or places where you get news. Just yell it out.
NPR?
Loudly, because I'm old.
Al Jazeera. BBC.
NPR, I heard someone else. What else?
TikTok.
Reuters, what? KXAN. I was interviewed by KXAN today. YouTube? Yeah, well, okay. No, it's interesting because that's one of the things. What's a news site and what's a platform? Because the New York Times and Washington Post and all kinds of sites post on YouTube. So it is an interesting thing. How do you figure out what's a news site and what's a platform that has stuff from, like I could be on there talking about cover music because that's one of my big things now is cover music, but you could also find, news produced by quote-unquote news producers. So who makes news? Before we go, you might have heard that I had some sports in my background. Yeah, this is a little embarrassing, but I'm going to share it with you. This is me when I was in college, and I was interviewing the Harlem Globetrotters because they'd come to Texas A&M. What I like is how serious I look and how this athlete is taking me seriously. But yes, I love sports, and I've always loved sports. So, these are some of the terms to remember today, because I think some of you kind of have to write about this, or you'll have something that you got to turn in, right? So, get the term social construction of news and whatever you produce, okay? How many of you heard of social construction? Yeah, some of you have heard of it. All right, okay. Gatekeeping. News, now those two are theories, all right? Now, newsroom leadership and newsroom culture are things we're going to discuss. And news values could also be considered, I'd say it's more of a concept than a theory. What's the difference between a concept and a theory? I don't know, but I just made that up and it sounded pretty good. So I'm going to go with that. Oh. So here, I was going to say, here's something you'll never see in journalism. Right? No news today. Nothing happened. Have you ever seen anything close to this? No weather forecast, no Longhorn football updates, because every day in the city somebody's giving a Longhorn football update. So we never see this. So how many of your grandparents still watch the 10 o'clock news? Yeah. Some may watch the 6 o'clock news. On the slowest news day, there's still a newscast. On the slowest news day, there's still, like, newspapers, they still come out. On the slowest news day, NPR is still churning out NPR stuff, right? Usually in that NPR voice. So there's always news. So what are examples of news? Give me an example of something that is quote-unquote news. Yeah.
NCAA scores.
NCAA scores, definitely news. That UH-A&M game, ooh. Right? So what, another example, just yell it out.
War of congressional hearings.
Congressional hearings? Some congressional hearings though. Because think about it, we see the important congressional hearings, unless you watch C-SPAN, you must watch a lot of C-SPAN. Just yell it out.
War developments.
War developments, absolutely, right? Now, let's think about that, war developments. Which wars? I would guess there may be 10 conflicts, maybe more going on right now, but what are the two that we hear the most about?
Ukraine and Russia.
Ukraine and Russia, and
Palestine.
Right. Those are the two we hear about, but we don't really hear about other ones. So the question is, what becomes news? This image is actually from CBS News before it announced President Kennedy had been assassinated. So this slide is from 1963. There are things we can all agree are news. Man walking on the moon. Except for my crazy Uncle Ray Ray who thinks it didn't happen, but you know. So, walking on the news is news. I am not good with this clicker, but that's okay. It just died. Let me go here. There we go. When a president is elected, that's news. news, right? We can all agree that that's news. Okay? But then it becomes, when a president is elected here in the US, it's news. It's probably news everywhere because the US has such global dominance. But let's talk about social construct, because news is a social construct. What I mean by that is, once you get past the things, the big things we can all agree are news, and even then, someone is deciding what's news. One of my jobs at the New York Times was to decide what went on the front page of the Sunday and the Monday New York Times, the most read papers. Little old crazy me, who was interviewing Harlem Globetrotters decades earlier, right? So there's a human who's deciding what's news. And it's all part of social construction. And some of you raised your hands earlier and said you knew what this was. So it's a concept that exists, not an objective reality, but as a result of human interaction. Okay, so we treat it as something that is natural and it's just always been there. But it's really something because of human interaction. It's also an idea that has been created and accepted by the people in a society. So we all agree that there's something called news. And we all agree that it can be on at 6 o'clock and 10 o'clock if you live in Central Time. So it's a social construct. Now, I will let you a little secret about Wikipedia. It's like first base in dating and baseball. It's a start. Don't use it at the end, use it at the beginning. But this is a really good definition. It's the meaning, notion, a connotation placed on an object or an event by a society, and adopted by that society with respect to how they view or deal with the object or event. All that means is that we accept it. Now, there are all kinds of ways that you can talk about social construction. And here's one way. Someone decided how these United States of America would be shaped. Someone decided that the Red River would be a border here. Which river is this one? Sabine, people. I think, isn't it? Okay? Someone decided, Congress, that Wyoming and Colorado would be shaped like rectangles. So you see how those are social constructions? Borders are social constructions. What are you thinking about?
Well, I watched a video the other day about how there's actually no squares.
I did not call it a square.
Oh, rectangle.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So this one's actually bigger at the bottom, or one's bigger at the top. But yes, see, I knew that. I'm all over that. But Congress decided the shape of these. But we accept these as the shape of stuff, right? We accept the shape of Texas, but it's socially constructed. So now, let's just get back to social construction of news. Take a look at this definition. So a journalist's educational and personal background, workplace arrangements, and interactions with the larger society over a period of time all affect the construction of news. And this is going to get into newsroom leadership. Okay? So, let me go this way. I did a 360. Oh, let me go back. So, all Sunday front pages from a couple of days ago. What's the lead story in the New York Times? Hint, 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 it tends to be top right. What's the lead story in the New York Times?
Arrests and attack.
Arrests and attack. But then there's a story on India's sugar cane fields, and school is healing, and Princess Kate. And then at the Statesman, we're talking about Texas abortion ban exceptions proposed and pro-voucher supporters, okay? And then the Dallas Morning News is talking about gun trafficking efforts escalating in North Texas. And it's talking about the Texas Rangers. I think they won the World Series last year, is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So, but you see how all of these have constructed a different view of what's news. If you live in one of these towns, you have a very different view from the Times, which is a national paper. And it even goes to the website. So I've got the Wall Street Journal here. Now you see how they say Evan Gushkovich, and I always mispronounce his name, 11 months detained. That is a Wall Street Journal reporter who has been detained in Russia. So he's high up on the page. But he's not in the New York Times, and he wasn't on the Washington Post that day, though the Washington Post did end up doing a story on him. So if you read the Wall Street Journal, his detainment becomes news that you follow. So you see how that works? So what's happened to him is news for Wall Street Journal readers. I'll go this way. Now, this is the Statesman's front page, and this is the front page of the Wichita Falls paper. What do they have in common? Yeah, that's actually a promo, but it's like an ad. It's like an internal thing, an internal ad. And if you lived in Wichita Falls, you might think this is something special for you. And if you live in Austin, you might think it's special for you, but it's something that the Gannett papers put out. So these are owned by the same company. Therefore, the Final Four shining moments. Do y'all know what the term, why we use the term shining moments with the Final Four? Okay. That's because at the end of the Final Four, CBS always used to do this montage of what happened, and they called it the shining moments. So what's interesting is that newspapers are for old people, right? An old person would know that, and it doesn't expect for you to know what this is. But you might think that's something special. Thomas J. Henry you'll find in all across Texas, right? So in terms of social construction of news, two things come into play. Newsroom leaders. Now, how many of you have heard of Woodward and Bernstein? Right? How many of you have heard of Watergate? Okay? So Watergate, the reporting of Woodward and Bernstein led to a lot of things, including Richard Nixon's resignation. So Ben Bradley was the editor. He put these two reluctant young reporters who did not want to cover a bail hearing, and it ends up turning into Watergate. Okay? So he makes the decision, no, we need to cover this hearing. The other thing is going to be something called news values, and these kind of conflate with each other. Can you read these? Y'all read those out loud. That top one is
Impact.
And then?
Timeliness. Proximity. Prominence. Oddity. Conflict. Human interest. Helpless.
And you all win a prize. So yeah, so we're going to see the conflation of a newsroom leader and these news values. Okay? So one of the things that we all know this is because of research that happened in the 50s that's still relevant today. So there is this research by David Manning White in which he followed an editor who chose the copy that would go inside a newspaper, because in the 1950s there was radio, there was some TV, and there were mainly newspapers. So he had these values. He was a gatekeeper. What does a gatekeeper do? It swings open, and what else does it do? It closes. So the gatekeeper determines what goes in and what goes out. Okay? So he decides what news is. And if you can look at some of this, we find him rejecting one piece of wire copy with the notation, "He's too red." Now, what did that mean in 1950? He's a communist, yeah. So this guy, Mr. Gates, decides that it's not news. Now, there's another story having to do with the Townsend plan. But the gatekeeper feels that the merits of the plan are dubious, so he keeps it out of the paper. Right? Like he just says, well, that's not news. 18 pieces were marked BS, in case you thought y'all made up the term, and some is marked propaganda. So highly subjective value judgments. And I think there's a little bit more on that. Second category is stuff he decided he didn't have space for. But here's the funny thing. If you're putting together a newscast or a newspaper or anything like that, like an evening newscast or something for NPR, you determine what there's room for and what is not room for. You always can determine that. And if you're doing the evening news, you've got, I think, 20 minutes maybe of news time. But that's not all news. What else has to go in the evening news? Yeah, there's going to be weather. Yeah, 10 minutes of that's going to be ads and promos. Do socks really make your feet smell? Details after this. But there's weather. What else is there?
Traffic?
Huh?
Traffic?
Traffic, yes, in the morning there's definitely traffic. And what else is there?
Sports.
Sports. So how much news is there actually in that 30-minute newscast? Right? Someone determines that. And we can skip this next thing. Okay, newsroom culture. So this is the other part, and this also gets into leadership. How many of you have already started, well, I know this may be your first year. How many of you have ever worked in an office? Okay? You kind of learn pretty soon what you're supposed to wear if they don't tell you. Who's friendly to young people and who isn't, right? There are things you just sort of pick up on. And a lot of that's culture. Well, newsroom culture affects what is news and who produces news. And this is from something from 1955, and it's still true. Journalists become socialized. So it's not so much that someone says, this will get you on the front page of the New York Times. This will lead NPR. This will do whatever. When you realize that your story on chicken coops never makes the front page, maybe I don't have the right story ideas. Or the bosses are giving the better assignments to someone else. Now here's a little something, I don't know if I'm supposed to tell this tale, but when I was at the Times, Viagra became available. And you'll see in this, maybe next slide, historically been run by men, older men. So that became a big deal, right? Because there's this old saying that news is what your editors think is news. So they're reporters and then they're editors. So this guy was the editor, chief editor of the New York Times in 1942. Here's something from 1983. Is there a lot of difference? Maybe not so much. By the way, there's nothing wrong with older white men running journalism. It just means you're going to have a particular perspective. So, after the '89 earthquake, you may not be able to tell, but that's a woman. Her name is Soma. And then this is the last A1 meeting in 2015. So, all these last set of pictures, it used to be a big table. And all newsrooms have this, a big table where the leaders of the newsroom get together, they sit around, and they decide what is news. We just happen to have these pictures. So after the '89 earthquake, of course, the earthquake was news, right? So here, how does this picture look different from the other pictures? Besides that it's in color. Anything different about this one?
There's men and women.
Huh?
There's men and women?
Men and women.
Let's see.
And this is actually the editor.
Oh.
It's an African American man.
I think there's just more people overall on the second picture.
That is a really astute observation. They got a bigger table. They literally got a bigger table to have more people at the table. Interestingly though, you're still sitting around a table. So there are more people with a seat at the table, but does that mean they have a voice? I can tell you that in this photo, this person and that person have the most power. In this photo, this person and this person have the most power. The other people are sitting there from different departments and they're pitching things, but they don't have the same power. So newsroom leadership will determine what is news. Okay? Now, what do they base what is news on? They just don't wake up like, I didn't wake up one day and decide, you know what I think the lead story will be in the New York Times today? So these things are pitched to you, plus of course my bosses are talking to me. I could really get my inner older male in me and figure out what they'd like. But leadership nowadays can look a little different. These are the Austin newsroom leaders. So he stepping down as of Friday. This is the editor of the American Statesman. He's at a TV station. She's at KUTX. This is the editor of the Austin Chronicle. That's the editor of the Texas Tribune. That's the editor of KXAN or KView. And that's the editor of the 19th. The 19th. It's very different from all of the rest of these, because the 19th is specialty news. So the 19th reports on gender politics and policy. It covers a lot of issues that people who identify as female think would be news. So its news site is going to look very, very different from the American Statesman. Okay? La Voz. It's going to look very different and read differently. It's in a different language. KAZI. It has an African American audience, the radio station. So their concepts or their mission for news will look very, very different from other organizations. This is all social construction determined by news leadership. This is the very first black newspaper in America. And one of the lines they say in 1827, I think that is that we want to speak for ourselves. Because there were abolitionist papers and there were all these other papers, but there was no African American voice. So that's the other thing. Depending on what the mission is, that's going to affect what's considered news. It could be me. Thank you. Now, even though Austin seems to have more faces in news and leadership, this is the actual pipeline of leadership in media and entertainment. So this includes news, and it includes, I think, the movie industry. So when people come into the industry, you see that women make up 48%. Okay? But then moving to manager, senior manager, VP, senior vice president, C-suite, and then board. You see how the pipeline shrinks? So Austin is unusual that it has a more, and I'm just going to say multicultural, more identity, more people of different identities serving in leadership. But this is also really interesting too, because it's not just about reporters in the newsroom. So consider these like the lowest rung. They're reporters, graphic editors, and do they have as much say as an editor or an executive director? Just guess. No. So again, this just shows you why leadership often looks the way it does. Leaders often now rely on something called news values. And the attributes that journalists believe make one event, person, or story more newsworthy than another. Now, on January 24th, in Laredo and in Abilene, who here is from Laredo? All right. Who here is from Abilene? All right, yes. Representing. Now, Laredo is talking about the border and the planning director's job in jeopardy. Okay? That's something people in Laredo care about. And also, Nuevo Laredo to host the Expo Congreso de Comercio. So this is very, very local, right? In Abilene, tell us about the Abilene Flying Bison. I guess that's the minor league team? So that became big news. But here they talk about the border too a little bit. So when we look at news values, I got it, it's cool. We're going to see of the 8, proximity is a thing, right? So the Laredo paper and the Abilene paper are not going to look exactly alike. Number 1 is impact. How much does this story matter to our readers? How many of you know what happened in Baltimore overnight? All right, what happened in Baltimore? Bridge collapse. And technically that will affect, some of the traffic going in, especially cars. But how does that affect your life here in Austin? Not really, kind kind of, sort of. It does, but in a kind of going way back. Impact is more, UT decides to raise tuition 10%. Does that impact your lives?
Yes.
Yeah. So that's magnitude. So you think about what does it have on a community? And with 50,000 plus students, that would affect you. If housing prices raise 5%, can it go up anymore? So that's impact and magnitude. And sad to say, how many of you were in Houston during Hurricane Harvey or in any of that area? Yeah, that had a big impact, right? So that's impact. Timeliness tends to be breaking news. Now, you all know about the Baltimore thing because it was breaking news, right? CNN and Fox, which by the way, if you were to measure the amount of real news on either one of those channels, it wouldn't even reach 10%. A lot of it is talking heads. You know what we mean by talking heads, right? Well, I believe this so-and-so, or you're so full of crap, and stuff like that, right? Talking heads. It's a lot of opinion. It's a lot of people opining. But the bridge was news. It's timeliness. Proximity, we see how proximity is. Do you think people in New York City really care that the Longhorns almost made it to the national championship game? Do they care? No. But do you care about the latest 5-star restaurant opening up in New York? Maybe. Probably not. So proximity is very important. I'll tell you a personal thing right now. How many of you heard about the Bastrop, the bus accident that happened? Yeah, well, there was one child who died, and the other person who died was a Moody College doctoral student who was about to defend his dissertation. Now, in theory, 2 deaths are always sad, but in the scheme of things, that would not be big news. But it's big news to us because we're in Central Texas, and it's big news in Moody College because this was a Moody College student. So you see how proximity plays in how we think about news. And prominence. Now, if I got into, let's say a bicycle hit me on Speedway, which almost happened as I walked over here. Nobody would really care. What if a bicycle almost hit Jay Hartzell on Speedway, or hit Jay Hartzell on Speedway? Then we care. So what if Elon Musk was shopping in the co-op? That might be news, right? So prominence is just, okay, Princess Kate, period, enough said, discuss. All the things that Princess Kate happens to be going through. It's prominence, right? She's not going, I guess you could say she will be queen, but she really wouldn't be in charge, right? So that's prominence. So when you're a news leader, you're thinking, which of these are going to come into play? This is why I'm going to make, so why do you make the flying bison the lead story if you're in Abilene? Which one of these? Proximity, yes. So that's how that decision is made. See if I can get these other ones up. I got it. Then there are these 4 other ones. Oops, and I gotta hurry up. There's oddity, novelty. Really, that bridge collapse falls under oddity, novelty, because it doesn't happen all the time. It's that weird thing that happens. So, how many of you have ever seen this line in the story? well, we never thought that something like that would happen in a small town here. That's the oddity novelty of it all. You expect it to happen in New York City or Chicago, but you don't expect it to happen where you are. Conflict? A lot of politics and sports are conflict, but it's people disagreeing, right? So we see a lot of politics, human interest. So this is about, and I know you've all seen this story, after 55 years, the first grade teacher is retiring, and she's meant so much to the community. Or the baker who's baked forever, or the cafeteria worker. How many of you were somewhere when a cafeteria worker retired, it was like a local story? You know? Yeah, that's a human interest story. And helpfulness. 10 things that will guarantee you get a job when you graduate from UT. Now I got your attention, right? Or it could be a restaurant review, or anything like that. So those are helpfulness, service journalism. So let's try to come up with some stories for the Daily Texan, which I happen to have right here. The lead story on this issue of the Daily Texan is UT ends test optional policy. What's interesting about this is that all of you are already in, right? So it's kind of like, okay, but it's still something you want to know about. So which one of these is this about the test optional? Which one of these would you say for the Daily Texan? Which news value are we using? You can be more than one. Proximity is one. And what's another one, maybe? Impact? Yes. Yeah, so that's how these work. Now, if you look at today's Statesman, we've got the school bus, because that's local. And we've got a lot of Paxton. What's that going to be? Deal of Paxton might, let's use this one. Paxton's records demand block. So that's clearly conflict. So you see how editors use these values. If you're the quote-unquote New York Times, a lot of times impact is going to determine. And if you notice, there are very few stories on the front of the New York Times, even in the New York edition, about New York City. Okay? So I think to that, we go to any questions that you all might have. Social construction of news, you all got that?
You beat me to it. I was going to ask if we could thank you with a round of applause, but thanks. All right, I've got 2 questions, and we'll see if we have time for a third. The first, it's a little bit of a long one. What would happen if multiple disastrous events happen in the span of 1 week? Which one would take priority? What if they're all equally important to see? Similar disaster levels, similar death toll, etc. Is there a way that a newsroom could extend a newspaper or a broadcast to cover more if there's more important stuff to see?
Right, so if something, most things are done on a daily basis now because of the web. So if something happened on one day and then something happened the following day and something happened the following day, and I've been in those situations, if each one would take a new quote-unquote lead story, that's the top story. Okay? If you're a weekly paper, you might have to make that decision. But at one point, you just decide which one is more important. So I'll give you an example. The Times wrote a great piece on why tilapia is terrible for you. It's terrible for the ocean. Terrible for the ocean, it's not good for your system, and a lot of bad things happen with tilapia. Well, you got that story in the early edition. That night, Osama bin Laden was found and killed by our own general. So guess what happened to the tilapia story? Right? All of a sudden, I think the tilapia industry told somebody where Osama was going to be. It's like, you know what? We can't have this as a lead story in the New York Times. So we're going to help this all out. So you do make a decision still.
Thank you so much. And also, please remain seated until the end of the lecture. Next question. How did you become interested in your field? And then why did you pursue a PhD in journalism?
I became interested in my field because my dad got free tickets to the Astros and I could sit in the press box. And if I was quiet, I could watch baseball games every night during the summer and got free food. Who wouldn't want to be in sports after that, right? So I've known since 4th grade that I wanted to be a sports writer. So, and then after all the time, all my family is still in Houston. And I decided to get a PhD so I could teach at a historically black college. It hasn't happened. Last time I looked, UT is not an HBCU, but that's okay. But that's one of the reasons why I got a PhD. Plus, I was more interested in research at that point.
Which actually leads into our final question, which is what does a PhD in journalism entail? What does a dissertation for a PhD in journalism look like?
A PhD in journalism can look like a lot of things, but usually you're analyzing content. So I looked at black columnists and I analyzed what they wrote, and I put it into what's known as frames or themes, and I then interviewed them to ask them about what they did. Because I'm really interested in people who are in newsroom leadership, and columnists tend to have leadership roles. But my dissertation was like 300 and something pages, but a lot of that was, references, because I had to list all the stuff. But I'm helping someone who's about to do a dissertation on places outside of libraries where you can get internet in small towns. So journalism and media is a pretty broad category. You just end up looking at a lot of stuff and reading stuff, and you have to come up with a new theory, what this all means. So that's a dissertation, I think pretty much in all fields.
Thank you so much. Thank you all so much for attending tonight. I cut you off. Were you going to say something?
Oh no, thank you all. Thank you, I really appreciate it.
Check out
I'm gonna go back. I'm going home. Yeah. Oh shit, you're right. I'm excited. Oh my god, no, I need to text you. Fucking, I forgot to text her about McElroy. That's really bad, normally when I see you,
Dominion voting. So it came out that a lot of what Fox was saying about the election, people didn't believe, but the business strategy was to keep it up because their readers, their viewers wanted that. So I'm not saying whether that's right or wrong, but just to know that it turns out it was a business strategy.
Got it. So which is why the lawsuit